George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Merry Christmas to all the Orthodox Christians around the world who are celebrating Christmas Day, but who I hope are still tuning in this evening to the mother of all talk shows. Nothing orthodox about Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton likes them young, says a message from Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailbird, the paramour of Jeffrey Epstein in the Epstein files. Humiliation piled on humiliation for the so-called Duke of York. Not so grand nowadays. The Queen's son is disgraced, but could he be heading for the slammer? Is that even legally possible in the United Kingdom? Who knows? Everything is up for grabs, including all those underage girls in the Virgin Islands, in Florida, in New York City, everywhere that Jeffrey Epstein had a house. Mind you, it was some consolation that the former Prime Minister of Israel, EhudBarak, visited Epstein 36 times. Most of those times after he'd already been convicted of transporting children and having illegal sex with those children. Makes you wonder what they found to talk about, doesn't it? It's going to be a bumpy night, I promise you. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
The Epstein files reveal that the judge involved ordered Ghislaine Maxwell to search all of her electronic devices for the word association PrinceAndrew and the word dildo. Now, I know that PrinceAndrew is a bit of a tool and not the sharpest one in the box, but the judge ordered it nonetheless, and Maxwell's lawyers had to comply. We don't yet know why, and we don't yet know what the results were. But the rich and famous, infamous, are all running for cover. Those that were peripatetic around news studios on just about anything else that didn't concern them. Yes, you, Lord Mandelson, Keir Starmer's prime consultant and leading advisor. That's Peter Mandelson, for the uninitiated. Now he's a lord, but once upon a time he was a bosom buddy and shopper with Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Mandelson has not said a single word about any of the kerfuffle around the Epstein files breaking all over the world this week. I wonder why not. Neither has PiersMorgan, frequently photographed with the aforementioned Ghislaine Maxwell. Usually got plenty to say, nothing to say about the Epstein files. Bill Clinton has not yet appeared on national television to say, brimming with faux sincerity, I did not have sex with that minor. But it's early days, yet this story is going to run and run. I'm not actually all that interested, you'll have to forgive me, in the sex lives of other people, but I'm deeply interested in what the Prime Minister of Israel found to talk about on his 36 visits to Jeffrey Epstein. and why the former Prime Minister of Israel, EhudBarak, established a company with Jeffrey Epstein years after the Epstein child molesting, trafficking paedophile had been convicted in court of committing sexual offences against minors. That would normally put most prime ministers, former prime ministers of American allies, of Western countries, that would normally put them off the close company of Jeffrey Epstein. On the contrary, it seems to have attracted the attention of EhudBarak, and I'm wondering why. Aren't you interested in where the tapes are that were collected and deposited in the multiple homes of Jeffrey Epstein, where there were secret cameras everywhere, particularly in the bathrooms, Andrew, particularly in the massage parlors, particularly in the bedrooms, where the rich and famous presumably slept, and maybe more than slept. These tapes are presumably in the hands of the FBI. When will the American people get to see them? When will the people of the United States, indeed the people of the world, get to know what's on the tapes, who's on the tapes, with whom, doing what to, with whom? These are legitimate questions to which there are as yet no answers. As I say, they're welcome to blank out the private parts of EhudBarak, probably an unimpressive sight. But I want to know what EhudBarak was talking to Epstein about. I want to know what the former Prime Minister of Israel had to do with this sex offender. I'm also mildly interested in what could possibly have attracted Lord Peter Mandelson, who famously plays for the pink team and cannot have been much interested, if at all, in the bevy of beauties around Jeffrey Epstein's swimming pool. I better not say any more on that. The truth is, these rich and powerful people, some of them still very powerful. Mandelson could scarcely be more powerful. He's the #1 advisor to the leader of the opposition, who looks set to be the next Prime Minister of Britain, although a week is a long time in politics, and it's 52 weeks possibly until the British general election. But if Keir Starmer wins, then Lord Mandelson is but a heartbeat away from the Prime Minister of Britain. When Starmer was asked, didn't Peter Mandelson have questions to answer about his close and long association with Jeffrey Epstein? Starmer, the leader of the opposition, answered, I know no more than you know. Well, why don't you know more than we know, Starmer? Don't you have a responsibility to know if your chief advisor was committing sex crimes on his visits to the sex criminal Jeffrey Epstein? Don't you have a duty to know more than we do? What kind of answer is that from potentially the next Prime Minister of Britain? Bill Clinton likes them young. Well, is the Pope a Catholic? Do bears defecate in the woods? I suppose the question is, how young is young, Bill? And did young mean illegally young? Bearing in mind the different ages of consent within the United States, never mind in the misnamed Virgin Islands, and a different one in London, where PrinceAndrew is accused, amongst other jurisdictions, of having slept with a young girl below the age of consent in some of those places, who was moreover forced to do so, who was moreover allegedly a sex slave in the employ of Jeffrey Epstein. These are deep and dark and troubled waters, but they may not be unconnected to the political situation that we face today. After all, if Israel and Prime Minister EhudBarak is in possession of compromat, of compromising material on the American political class, on Peter Mandelson, on the Duke of York, well, it would place Israel in a strong position, not to put too fine a point on it, in commanding the continuing feverish, fanatic loyalty of the British and American political class, wouldn't it? If these people knew that there were videotapes of them committing heinous sexual offenses against underage children in the possession of Mr. Barak, in the possession of the Mossad, well, it would buy their silence, to say the least, wouldn't it? Now, since South Africa, blessed South Africa, asked the International Court of Justice to rule that Israel is committing acts of genocide in Gaza and to order them to cease and desist, which, if they refused, would have severe consequences for their international relations with a whole number of governments. Presumably, Joe Biden would go on kissing and cuddling Netanyahu. Presumably, Blinken also. But there are many countries in the European Union that would legally not be able to continue their relations with Israel were it found guilty of acts of genocide, were it refusing to cease and desist from those acts. There are many governments in Europe that would be legally bound to break all relations with Israel were that to happen. So God bless South Africa. You may well ask, why South Africa? Well, apart from other reasons, South Africa was a byword for apartheid. Israel is the new apartheid state. The leaders of the African National Congress, which I gave some of the best years of my life to help win their heroic struggle against that apartheid system. I was a bit part player, a minor player, but I was the only person on the left in the whole of Great Britain who traveled the length and breadth of apartheid South Africa, acting on behalf of the African National Congress. I've been disappointed many, many times over the subsequent decades at the performance of the ANC across many different issues. But I have never been more proud of the ANC, more proud of South Africa, now that they are the one country that had the balls to invoke the Genocide Convention to ensure that next week the court will begin to hear South Africa's 80-page case, which is a must-read. It is a masterpiece of jurisprudence, a masterpiece of narrative, and it makes a case which is unanswerable in the mouths of the Israeli leaders themselves. You know, Israel's very worried about the case for the reasons that I just mentioned. But how they're going to even muster an answer to the South African charges is simply beyond me, because all South Africa has done is tabulate the genocidal, frenzied statements made by Israeli government ministers, made by Israeli army officers, and clipped the video of them carrying out the very genocidal acts that they were promising, threatening to commit. So for me, this case is game, set, and match. And if the judges of the ICJ are judges at all, rather than political hirelings, if these judges care about the reputation of their court, they can do no other than to find Israel guilty. What has Israel done since South Africa tabled this case before the ICJ? Well, they've stepped up the genocide. 3 hours ago, this evening, one 2,000-pound bomb murdered 80 people in one house in Gaza. 80 people sheltering there have been wiped out, all of them from the same extended family, most of them women and children. 40% of all the people killed in the last 93 days were small children. I'm not even talking about the 17-year-olds. I'm talking about small children, babies, sucklings, in the words of Benjamin Netanyahu when he threatened, promised to wipe them all out, every man, woman, child, suckling, goat, camel, ass. He said it on television. There's no getting out of that one. Since Blinken told Netanyahu that the United States wanted to see a reduction in the civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, those casualties have ballooned upwards. Israel is killing anything, everything that moves. The Al Jazeera reporter in Gaza, who'd already lost his wife, his son, his daughter, his grandchildren, who had already been wounded himself, today lost the last of his sons, also a journalist, in a targeted, deliberate attack. The first casualty of war, it said, is the truth, but in truth, the first casualty of this war is the truth teller. They are hunting down those that are taking the pictures, those that are recording the footage, those that are witnessing the carnage, precisely because they know that they are guilty of genocidal acts. I'm going to say something that's very painful to me to say as a student of the Second World War. Israel is killing children faster than the Nazis in the death camps at Auschwitz and Treblinka. That is a statistical fact in the time that I have been speaking. Palestinian children have been murdered, maimed. Many will be amputated. 1,000 have already been amputated without any anesthetic. Can you even imagine such a thing? Famine. Most of the people starving in the world today are starving in Gaza, a place just a few hours flying time from here, and just a few minutes from the Elysian fields of the Israeli kibbutzim, where fruit and vegetables hang in abundance. Disease is on the march and is actually now infecting the Israeli soldiers in the Strip, which might be why they have begun to withdraw from the northern part of Gaza in significant numbers. Although that might also be because the Palestinian partisans on the ground, in their own territory, in their own midden heap, in their own rubble, in their own slums. We're knocking hell out of the pampered Israeli invasion force. But don't think because they're withdrawing soldiers that means in any way a respite on this Orthodox Christmas Day for the poor Palestinians trapped in the cage. Because when they're not fighting on the ground, they're doing their killing from the air. Gaza is a death camp. The guards are murdering the captives. And the world is not just looking away. The world is facilitating it. At least our part of the world. Stay tuned. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. These type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is, to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Here's the poll this evening. Will Israel be convicted of genocide by the International Court of Justice? Now, please note the word will. Not the word should, but will Israel be convicted of genocide by the International Court of Justice? A large number of those who have already voted are making the point that whilst Israel should, they believe that they will not. I'm of the view that the court can do no other than to find them guilty and order them to cease and desist. But that's the poll. Will Israel be convicted of genocide by the International Court of Justice? 31,067 people have already voted, and I'm just announcing the poll now. Get your votes in before the end of the show, and your calls if you have anything to say. If you're in the US or Canada, it's toll free, and here is the number: +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's equally free of charge. It's 08081965522. That's 08081965522. And if you're in the rest of the world, as indeed I am myself, it's 00442039662625. That's 00442039662625. Now, why is Israel in the Eurovision Song Contest? Why does Israel play in the European Football Championships? These are questions I've asked myself virtually all of my adult life. But I'm certainly asking them more pointedly now. Russia has been blackguarded and banned from all international fora, all international competition. But Israel is still welcome to the Olympic Games in France this year? Seriously? When they're up before the ICJ for genocide? I mean, Hitler had Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936. If we'd known his intentions then, would we really have gone to those Olympic Games? Or are they selective about which invasions, which occupations, which genocides they care to condemn and sanction? Well, who better to ask this than Nima Roodsari, the football journalist, the football pundit, and co-host of the Italian Football Podcast. Nima, welcome back to the show. You are such a welcome guest. Your interview with me last year was enormously popular. I'm sorry to bring you back on, as it were, a non-football topic. But answer me, please. Why would Israel be welcome in Paris at the Olympic Games? Why are Israel even playing in the European Football Championships?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you, and Happy New Year, George. I'm glad to be with you. I wish it was in happier circumstances. Look, this is something that those of us who are a little bit perhaps more cynical, and I don't suggest that you are one of those people, would say is just par for the course. On the 24th of February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, politically supported by Belarus, 4 days later, the FIFA Council and the UEFA Executive Committee suspended all Russian teams, including Russian youth teams, for the actions of the Russian and Belarusian government. The IOC set up a solidarity fund on the 28th of February 2022. They issued recommendations following a resolution to not allow Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials to participate in any competitions under the umbrella of the Olympic movement, which included the Paralympic sports. Just imagine that. The IOC literally wrote, and I'm quoting from their homepage now, "The Olympic movement is united in its sense of fairness not to punish athletes for the decisions of their government if they are not actively participating in them. We are committed to fair competitions for everybody without discrimination." The current war in Ukraine, however, puts the Olympic movement in a dilemma. While athletes from Russia and Belarus would be able to continue to participate in sport events, many athletes from Ukraine are prevented from doing so because of the attack on their country. Well, back in 2018, the Palestinian national football team has, according to some reports, back then already lost 9 national players alone due to loss of limbs. That was 2018. We're now 3 months into an unhinged industrial scale exercise in mass murder, where some reports claim over 30,000 civilians have been killed, 2/3 of them women and children, on top of the starvation imposed on Gaza and the Palestinian people there as a tactic of war. This is without mentioning the systematic bombardment of hospitals, whereby now death and famine is joined by severe outbreaks of illnesses due to the lack of adequate healthcare available due to this illegal blockade. So the IOC, UEFA, FIFA, and all these other organizations have painted themselves into a corner. As I and many of us said at the time when speaking to media organizations, when we spoke out against the politicization of sports and football in particular, because we said at the time, we warned, if you cross this bridge, you will be forced to apply this in political matters that you're not comfortable with in applying. Well, now that shoe is very much on the other foot. That is, if you're so lucky as to have 2 feet unlike many athletes in Gaza who have had their feet and other limbs blown off by Israel, but in weapon attacks given to them by Joe Biden after he bypassed Congress just the other week. So the question is now, is the IOC a NATO toy, or is it truly an international organization for all of sports? Do all lives truly matter, or does the NATO cause du jour life matter more? Many have asked what to do. Well, now we must put pressure on these people to prove us, the cynics, wrong, that all lives do matter. Israel must be suspended from all sporting activities with effect of immediately until they end the illegal occupation of not one, but 3 countries, which they have occupied for decades, on top of being an apartheid racist state.
Well, that's an extraordinarily powerful answer to my question. So powerful that you're left to wonder why no one has attempted to square that circle. Why no one in the so-called mainstream media is even raising the fact that Russia was banned within days and Israel has killed 30,000 civilians, overwhelmingly women and children, and nobody's even raising the question of a ban. Nima, what if they're convicted of genocide in the ICJ? Are we going to have a genocide 11 playing in the Euros? Are we going to have genocide javelin throwers and middle distance runners competing in France at the Olympics? This is ludicrous, isn't it?
It's beyond ludicrous. It's utterly bizarre. It feels like we're in some sort of parallel universe where up is down and down is up. Look, what we are seeing now, given that Belarus, without actually being involved in the war, were also suspended, and the federations of many countries, including especially Sweden in winter sports, have been vocal about their opposition to that. They now have to answer to this. They are now responsible for this because their governments are actively aiding and abetting this genocide. And it is a genocide. Personally, much like your viewers who have voted in the poll, I don't believe that Israel will be convicted of genocide because of how the political status quo as it is. But the fact of the matter is, I hope that you're right and that, that you prove me wrong. What you said, I was listening to what you said earlier, that they have no choice but to convict them. I personally am a little bit more cynical. I think they'll just simply find a way to legally weasel their way out of it, as they have always done. But let's say that they do it exactly as you say, or if they are unable to, if they don't get convicted, what possible weight does this have in the world, in the eyes of the world? Everyone has seen it. We've seen people all over the world, from Stockholm to Washington to South Africa to Australia. Everyone is out in millions marching against the systematic murder and extermination of the Palestinian people, while everyone was celebrating Christmas and New Year's. And we're supposed to just ignore it and move on to the next thing. Well, we're not moving on. Israel has to be banned. It's as simple as that.
Nima, by the way, there's a petition being got up by Varoufakis' outfit, DM25. People should sign it. Many thousands are doing so you can actually physically do something about this. There it is there, suspend Israel from international sports. I urge you all to sign that petition. bit.ly/Israel ban. bit.ly/Israel ban. I encourage everyone to lend their support to that. But Nima, the truth is that all these countries that told us that politics should be kept out of sport, something that in an ideal world I would agree with. I actually really mean keeping some politics out of sport and other politics very firmly in it. I was at a Scotland game where all the corner flags were Ukrainian flags, where all the furniture, where all the billboards were in Ukrainian colours. And Graham Souness actually said that Scotland should let Ukraine win so that they would go through rather than Scotland. How's that for politics in sport? Yeah, as you know, the Celtic supporters caused massive fines on Celtic Football Club for the simple act of holding up Palestinian flags in the crowd. This is all so brazen. I'm wondering how nobody but thee and me are recognizing it.
Well, you see, that's the thing, George. I think more than thee and me are recognizing it. You see, I think the hypocrisy of it, this so-called rules-based order, which is basically my rules today and I've changed them whenever I feel like it, everyone has seen it. It's out in the open. No one's buying it anymore. It's absolute nonsense. It's nothing more than whatever they feel like doing at the day of choosing, and they don't feel that they should be held to account. Well, the world isn't buying it anymore. The multipolar world is here. The age of where they could do whatever they want, where NATO countries could do whatever they want, spearheaded by the United Kingdom and, of course, the United States, where they could do whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want, in any manner they want, and no one can hold them to account, is over. This has been a ginormous failure for them. The only thing that Israel and NATO is good at doing is murdering women and children. Militarily, they are being destroyed in battles between militaries in Gaza and in around the area. So all they are, and they have lost the entire narrative, so they have nothing left. And therefore, it's incredibly important. You mentioned that. What is it we can do? Well, here is something everyone can do. Everyone who has the internet can do this. Go on and sign that letter. Read that letter, and I really hope you bring on the author of that letter on your show, the great Katarina Pietkovic, a legal scholar with 2 PhDs in law, a brilliant legal sports mind, who can explain in far better detail than I can the legal framework supporting this. She worked day and night tirelessly putting this together, and now it's out there. You all can do it. Go out and sign it. Prove me wrong. Prove me the cynic and prove George right. Settle this bet between us. Prove George right that they will have to do something here, and prove me as a cynic and make me look stupid and say, you were wrong, Nima. All lives do matter. Go now and sign that letter. Israel has to be banned from the International Sporting Committee for as long as it is an apartheid state, occupies 3 countries, and continues to impose this mass murdering genocide on the Palestinian population. That's what you can do. Don't ask what you can do. Don't let these feelings of hopelessness consume you in your solitude. There is something you can do. You can go to demonstrations. You can sign petitions. You can organize on grassroots, a grassroots level, and tell the rulers that they are ruler of our minds and hearts no more.
Finally, Nima, there's going to be trouble in Paris at the Olympic Games if Israel show up with the blood still running in profusion, not just in Gaza, but in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, where today, I saw the film. I saw the white phosphorus bombs landing in a town in South Lebanon. A clear crime under international law. In Lebanon, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and God knows where else by the time we get to the Olympic Games. Maybe in the Yemen, the poorest country, one of the, if not the poorest country in the whole world, maybe on fire with blood everywhere. And we're really going to see Israel at the Olympic Games in Paris? Is Macron mad?
Well, I think that's a trick question, because I don't think Macron is mad, but I do think he and the rest of these so-called supine gentlemen and ladies who lead the EU and Britain and the rest of the West are not mad, but they are bought. I'll come out and say it. They work at the behest of the oligarchy, and the oligarchy wants this. Otherwise, this would not be happening. Now, I do think, again, prove me wrong, I think that Israel will turn up at the Olympics. I think they won't even bother to go ahead with a song and dance of forcing them to participate under a neutral Olympic flag, but they will force them, but they will allow them to participate, and they will call, like they have always done, accuse everyone who speaks out of being anti-Semitic. But the problem is, these old tricks don't bite anymore. It's out in the open. No one believes a word they say. And therefore, it's important now more than ever, when their lies have been exposed, when they have been exposed for being the mass murdering, genocidal, fascist hacks that they are, now's the time to push on even harder. Now's the time to expose everyone and say, if you really believe in the Olympic movement and your anti-discrimination, prove it. Don't just talk a pretty sentence, prove it with your actions. Ban Israel now.
I said finally, but another question occurred to me, and you're a good man to answer it. Your football podcast is the gold standard. There are hundreds, many hundreds of players whom I hazard a guess feel the pain of the people in Palestine very keenly indeed. I could name names, no need to. There are hundreds of Arab players in top-flight football around Europe and elsewhere. There are even more hundreds of Muslim players. Where is the John Carlos moment is what I'm thinking of. Where is the athlete who will don the black glove and stand on the podium, will do something, say something powerful enough to jolt at least their own fan base into discussing this and these issues?
Well, we saw what they did to poor Youssef Attal, the Algerian footballer in France, who handed him a suspended sentence for reposting a video claiming he was anti-Semitic when he was critical of what Israel was doing. We've seen it in the past before. This is what they do. They are like the mafia. They reign by terror. As soon as somebody speaks out, they go after him in such a way that they silence him. They take away his livelihood. They fine them. They throw everything that they can at them so that they can deter anyone else from speaking up after them. But the question now remains: how many more people have to die? And is your money really that good? To paraphrase a Bob Dylan song, which I know you love as well.
Wow. Nima, I could talk to you all night, and many of the viewers are saying they wish I could. Let's talk again sooner. Thank you very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Well, what do you think of that? US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. Rest of the world, 0044 203 966 2625. A quick break, and I'll be right back with your calls. A big thanks to the people who support me on the Patreon page. I really have come to depend on the income from that. It costs £1 a week, not even the price of a cup of coffee in an insalubrious cafe. If you think you could stretch to that, please support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, the MOATS team have added a tiered system on my Patreon page where you can become an official MOATS graduate. How about that? I speak as someone who graduated from nowhere. from the factory floor in Michelin. But you can become a MOATS graduate and legend. You can give a regular donation to support the show and my work. You can now upgrade from a mere Patreon to a MOATS graduate at £10 a month, as opposed to £5 a month, I think it is. And you can receive official MOATS legend status for £20.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I do hope before the night is out you have followed me on Patreon. It will cost you the price of a cup of tea per week. That's all. And it will support my work and keep me going, keep me fueled. And I think that's important, and I hope that you do too. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, Abdi Boos sends 70 South African rand. I've no idea what that is these days, Abdi, but it's a very generous donation. In any case, this was in the super chat with this question. Hi, George, greetings. There is tension rising in Red Sea, Somalia, which Ethiopia is trying to take by force, supported by the UAE and Britain. What is your opinion about this new front line? I hate to say this, Abdi, but I know very little, if anything, about it. I don't know everything about everything and everywhere, but I'll make it my business to look into it. Mustafa is on the line from Virginia in the USA, but wanting to talk about Israel. Mustafa, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. I cannot stress that enough. I'm a huge fan of yours. I admire your bravery and boldness, which is something lacking these days in the political spectrum. I praise you for speaking the truth as well. I have a question and a remark. I have a conundrum. The so-called the Western countries who always been advocating for human rights fail these days to point out or to criticize, I mean, for even with even a word, the current ongoing slaughter in Israel. I don't understand. I'm trying to see if there is something above them, or I'm not able to understand. Do you have anything to say about that? Do they?
Yes, it's because they were lying. It's because they were lying, Mustafa. They didn't really care about human rights. I've lived so long through bloodbath after bloodbath of Africans, of Asians, of Latin Americans, of Middle Easterners. I have seen all these governments supporting the most brute tyrannies, dictatorships, massacring these people. Their people. I have seen these Western governments overthrowing any government that sought to pursue a path of independent self-government for their people, a new path, a different path. I have seen these countries drown people and lands in blood and chemicals. My first struggle was against the Vietnam War, in which the chief champion of human rights, the United States of America, massacred millions of people, drowned Vietnam in an ocean of chemical weapons, the deformities from which are still born in Vietnamese maternity wards, even now, 50 years after the events. I watched them secretly bomb Cambodia into the Stone Age without even telling their own government, their own Congress about it. I watched what they did to little Laos, tiny Laos, which has the dubious world record of being the most bombed country in the history of the world, though Gaza must be getting close to it now. Mustafa, they were lying. Human rights is a lipstick on the face of the pig. And that's what everyone has to grasp. And we're seeing it now, aren't we? Last word to you, Mustafa.
Yeah, then I don't see a point of being a part of a system that don't care about human rights. All they care about is profit, and that would be it. And I would like... so there's a remark that I would love to see in your show. I know there are a lot of people who advocate for the current genocide in Israel, in Palestine, and they want to have space in which they could defend their argument. I would be more than glad to see you expose them live in your show. And it is something that not only could be used against them, but at the same time would wake up more people, seeing people who root for the other side being dismantled and having no words or defense. Because I know you have the right words. I know that the truth trumps anything.
Thank you for that, Mustafa. They're as welcome as you were to call the numbers I have frequently announced. And this is for all comers. This is a university. This is a free space. There's nobody gets to hide and say they were triggered or their snowflakes began to melt. Not here. This is a proper university. This is what a university should be. Sharp and clear and ready to defend its point of view against any and all comers. I, Marticus, says, great guest, George, but it's going to take more than marches and petitions to get our own governments to listen. Is an international strike out of the question? Keep up the good work. Alas, it is. Given the parlous state of the trade union movement, particularly in Britain and the United States, given the rancid quality of the so-called leaders of most of those trade unions, how can you expect the rank and file to want to go on strike for Palestine? Their leaders will not even lead them out on strike to defend their own wages and conditions, with, of course, honourable exceptions. An email from Mike. If Israel participates in an Olympics boycott, the advertisers that buy spots on the broadcasters. If a car manufacturer advertises contact that manufacturer and you say you will no longer buy that product if you can't sell your advertisement, then the Olympics fail. Thank you. Mike, apologies if I didn't read that out as you would have liked me to. Let's take a call from my own country, from the holy ground, that is Coat Bridge, from our dear Caroline. Go ahead, Caroline. Caroline, you're on the air. Yes, you're on the air, dear. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, George. Can you hear me clearly?
Very clearly. The whole world is listening to Coat Bridge right at this moment. Go ahead.
Right. Hi, George. What it is, George, right, I know you, George, you're a unionist. Can you hear me clearly?
I can.
Right. George, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
You can hear me clearly. What it is, George, I want to state for the people in Ireland in the 6 counties, they mistake you as a unionist for the 6 counties. So I'm just pointing out that it's got nothing to do with the 6 counties. Right? You have got nothing to do with them. But what I don't understand is why you have never called out the Labour leader. He has never once called for a ceasefire. I was banned from YouTube for pointing out that 80% of all of the Nazis were killed by the Red Army. I was blocked for a week for speaking the truth. Right, I want you to call out the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland for not calling for a ceasefire. ceasefire now. He's a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim, as you said, George. Once the Catholic, always a Catholic. Right, so calling for the ceasefire.
Well, look, Caroline, I don't know if you've been in a Rip Van Winkle deep sleep over the last 93 days. I'm never done calling out the leaders of the Labour Party, including the rich Anna Sarwar that you just mentioned. I'm never done doing it. And anyone who watches the show twice a week or who follows me on Twitter, anyone who follows me on social media knows that. I hope you've not been away and missed me, Caroline. Email from Andrew. George, sadly, there are too many powerful... No, you can't, because you just insulted me and insulted the intelligence of the viewers who've multiply heard me denounce Labour. I did it on GB News last night, for God's sake. Email from Andrew. Sadly, there are too many powerful bad players when it comes to the ICJ for an impartial judgment to be made on Israel. The evidence is damning and obvious, but this will not be enough to convict because the ruling classes won't allow it. That's from Andrew MacDonald, who may be right. I think he's wrong. Abdi is in Minnesota. He wants to talk about Palestine too. Abdi, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, George. Assalamu alaikum. How are you guys doing today?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah barakatuh. Nice to hear from you. In Minnesota, where once Norman Coleman ruled. Go ahead.
Oh, my God. I was so glad you sank to his boat.
I campaigned in Minnesota in the election that defeated him.
Yeah,
exactly. I got my revenge.
I vividly remember that we still hold your statue in our doorways, honestly, because of that. And that's when I got to know you.
Thank you,
That's
Abdi.
when I got to know you, George. I would like you to turn your attention to. I feel really ashamed to talk about the new conflict of the East African, which you just mentioned a little while ago. After you mentioned an 80 people that was in a household, a whole family that has been dropped in one bomb. How can one just not think about that and really get knocked out? It's beyond imagination and my capabilities. But I would like to take you back to your mind, back when you were the MP on the floor that you had it one night. You made a speech about Ethiopian regime and how they wanted to take over Somalia, and you talked about that, and you know a lot. You might not know a little bit about this conflict, but you know about the Ethiopian regime, their interest and what they wanted, and you call them Ethiopia, occupying Somalia would be the glimpse of the East Africa, if I can borrow your words.
Well, yeah, of course, that was a different Ethiopian regime, and it was a couple of decades ago. But as I said to the previous caller, Abdi, I'm more than happy to acknowledge any lacunae in my knowledge of international affairs, as I have done on this one. But I'm equally determined to bone up on it and return to it with a suitably qualified guest. There you are, Abdi. I promise I will do that. Mohammed is in South Wales on Israel. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Good evening to you, George. How are you, sir?
Welcome.
Okay. My 2 points are right. The world's eyes are on the International Court of Justice about the genocide the Israeli governments are doing. No, if they don't commit, bring them to the court and make them that they are making genocide and bring them to the justice court. If they don't do that, because you know that, George, they got so much power, okay, Zionist, but law is a law for everybody, right? So basically what it is, if they don't do it, right, and make them come to the court and make them say that they've done genocide, okay, then there is no point having courts like these. And also, the other point I want to make, right, the other point I want to make with the UN, right, we can demolish the UN, they can close the shop down and move. Because what it is, they should, all those 153 countries should join the BRICS, where every person got an equal right for voting. Not 153 countries voted to stop the massacre happening in Palestine. One man comes up with his little flag. No, I'm not going to have it. Is that justice for everybody? Right? These countries like Britain...
this is music, Mohammed, this is music to my ears. I've been saying for many years, actually, that the United Nations is not fit for purpose, that an alternative to it should be constructed. I'm something of a student of the miserable, pathetic failure that was the League of Nations prior to the Second World War, which presided over, amongst other things, the Italian invasion and conquest of Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, that was powerless to stop Hitler and Mussolini raining down death on the people of Spain, drowning the Spanish Republic in blood, and many, many other failures, the Japanese invasion and the rape of Nanking, and so on. These days remind me of that. Nowadays, nobody talks about the League of Nations. Such a miserable failure was it, and collapsing in the ignominy of the Second World War. Nobody talks about it precisely because they're embarrassed about it. And that's how we should feel about the United Nations. Mohammed, thanks for that call. YouTube comments. Douglas Miller says, Slick Willie, please take long walks on short piers. And Mega John F1, re Epstein, coins the phrase which will live long, the grand old douche of York. And Mehdi says, and Russia did not bomb and shell the civilian population when they began the special military operation. They were there to save them. Israel and the West cannot say the same thing. Indeed, that is right. Now, coming up is one of the livest wires on the internet, the one and only Richard Medhurst, renowned independent journalist and political analyst, plus all your calls. Stay tuned.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I'm sorry, Mr. Trump, but that remains my favorite sting of all time. I am that haggis. What could be more Scottish than the haggis? Me. What, thin-skinned and full of crap? How brilliant was that? Here's the numbers. I need your calls. +1 844 944 3344 if you're in the US and Canada. 0808 196 5522 if you're in Britain or Ireland. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 0044 203 966 2625. Richard Medhurst is one of our most popular guests, and he knows and finds the words, particularly to a younger audience. He finds the words to convey exactly what's going on in the world, and therefore we're very glad to have him back. Richard, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Let me let me start, as it were, far from your home ground in the Levant. Let me start in the Yemen. Let me start in the Red Sea. We keep hearing blood-curdling threats from, amongst others, the jumped-up twerp who passes for Britain's Minister of Defence, that we're going to go to war with Yemen. With whose army? I have no idea. What's happening in the Red Sea now?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be back on MOATS. Yeah, I also don't know which army is going to take the fight to Yemen, because we tried this once already through the Saudis and the Emiratis, supplying them with weapons to do that, and they lost. And you know, this is not a long time ago. It's barely been a year since they had to go and make peace with the Houthis and admit defeat. And the situation in the Red Sea is very interesting, because when it comes to Gaza, you have 6 fronts, essentially. You know, you've got Gaza itself, you have the West Bank, and you know, the Jenin Martyrs Brigade, all the factions there that are giving the Israelis trouble because they're giving them trouble. Then you go to Syria, you go to Iraq, the American bases are under attack there. And then, of course, there's the Lebanese front and the 6th, and you know, which is last but not least important. That is the final front on you know, in this war, and it is without a doubt the most important, because what the Yemenis have done is disrupt global trade. So this is not just a question of punishing the Israelis financially for what they're doing in Gaza. It's also a question of making Western companies that do business with Israel and the United States, which is supplying Israel, also feel the shock. And so now they have to go around you know, South Africa, and they have to go, you know, if they want to cross the Mediterranean into the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea, they can't anymore. So what Yemen have done is effectively bring or take shipping back 200 years. And make no mistake, they're suffering a lot more than they're letting on. This is deeply humiliating for the West. It's deeply humiliating for Israel. And the fact that their international trade has been severed from the South it's really causing them a lot of trouble. The thing is that the Americans, they pulled back one of their ships from the Red Sea because of several developments. Hezbollah just the other day struck the Israeli port city of Eilat, which is on the Red Sea, showing you that not just Hezbollah but also Iraq, both of them can reach that far south with the weapon systems that they currently have. And this is just a taste of what they actually possess. So the Americans are deeply afraid of a wider confrontation, even though the Israelis certainly want that. The Israelis are happy to drag the rest of the world down with them. But the resistance are constantly developing better and better weapon systems. And so the result is that this is not just a defeat on the economic front, but also militarily. These so-called great armies like the Israelis, ourselves in Britain and the Americans, they we can no longer posture the way that we used to. And so while there's a decline in Western capabilities, the capabilities of the resistance are just going up and up. And of course, this is, I haven't even mentioned Iran as well, which is, in possession of far better missiles and systems than Hezbollah and the Yemenis have access to. Although, once again, it should be pointed out how far they have come. It is really a problem now that this war is on 6 fronts. I don't see how the Americans and the Israelis are going to dig themselves out of this one. They're really pinned down, and any army knows that when you're pinned down on more than one front, you're in big trouble, never mind 6.
Yes, let's move then to one of the most important of those 6, the one which you and I are both very familiar with, namely Israel's northern border, Lebanon's southern border. Israel is upping the ante. I mentioned earlier the white phosphorus attack, which I saw with my own eyes, landing on civilians in South Lebanon just this day, as clear an act of war crime as it's possible to see. You could see it coming out of the aircraft and landing on civilians in South Lebanon. They keep upping the ante. They're going further and further. They carried out an illegal assassination just a few days ago in Beirut itself. How close are we to an all-out war, a la 2006, between Lebanon and Israel?
Well, I don't want to make any predictions, but in 2006, which is, I mean, it's almost 20 years ago now. Even back then, Hezbollah once again surprised the Israelis. They were coming out of tunnels like you see Hamas doing now. And the Israelis were paranoid of being taken out by these so-called ghosts, right? These troops that they would never see. And of course, I was just talking about how Iraq and Lebanon can strike in the Red Sea. The same thing in 2006 when they took out an Israeli ship. So the capabilities that they possess today really frighten the Israelis. They're on a... The Israelis are at a stage now of decline, which you see in empires or colonies, where they become so desperate to cling on to power and to exist and to stay, to keep control of whatever place they've invaded, that they become irrational. And they even end up, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They start accelerating their own demise. This is what we're seeing right now. If it comes to an all-out war, Israel is going to get hit very badly. And what they did with this assassination, this shows you that they're losing the war, because the primary front is in Gaza, right? You have the Qassam fighters against the Israelis. They're wiping the floor with them. Every day you have videos coming out of them taking out, ground units, bulldozers, tanks. It is so embarrassing. And so to distract from this, the Israelis have gone and carried out these assassinations. Salah Haruri, he was the deputy leader of the Hamas political bureau. And he was mentored by Qasem Soleimani. And the date, they assassinated Haruri on the anniversary of the assassination of Soleimani. That's not a coincidence. That was on purpose. It was to provoke the resistance. And then, of course, the same day, they also bombed this memorial service that they had for Soleimani in Iran. And then they claimed it was ISIS, which we all know is an Israeli and an American proxy. And then they did an assassination of Mousavi, who was an Iranian general advising Syria against al-Qaeda and ISIS. And then they also, of course, carried out an assassination of the PMU in Iraq. And so these are Netanyahu's way of saying, I'm capable of doing things. But they're not going to win him the war. I mean, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin was also taken out by the Israelis. Did the resistance become weaker? No, on the contrary. The same thing with Soleimani. The resistance only became stronger. And this is because you can't defeat a resistance by killing one person, because the entire population is sick of Israel's oppression, of their occupation, of these things like dropping white phosphorus, which you just mentioned, which are so commonplace, and yet the whole world seems not to see it. So you can't defeat that by murdering one person. You have hundreds, thousands ready to take that person's place, and to continue the fight for liberation. So the last thing the Israelis want, if they were thinking straight, is a war with Lebanon. They can barely handle the front. I mean, just yesterday, the Hezbollah in retaliation hit it's actually an Israeli surveillance base. It runs drone operations, airstrikes, spy ops, Meron base, and it's at the highest point in occupied Palestine. And Hezbollah fired 62 ATGMs on it, and there's no Iron Dome that can deal with these things. They're land to land, and so 40 out of those missiles struck the Israeli base. And for the last 3 months, the Israelis have had their surveillance posts, observation towers. They're blinded now on the fence with Lebanon. So this is just a small taste of what is yet to come should the Israelis escalate foolishly and make this problem deeper than it is now.
Turning to the first front, I said earlier that the withdrawal of substantial numbers of ground troops from the northern part of Gaza is partly because of the spreading disease, fungal disease, that they have picked up in Gaza, a disease which has been the result of the destruction of water and sewage and electricity as a matter of deliberate policy, but to which the Israelis have not been affected before, exposed before. But the main reason, surely, is that the ground forces are being engaged by the Palestinian partisans of all factions and beaten in hand-to-hand fighting in these very auspicious topographical circumstances for a guerrilla army. I mean, it's very difficult to move tanks and artillery around the wreckage that Israel itself has made of 80% of Gaza. You have to get out your vehicle and come through the alley where the partisans are cutting them down in very large numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, George, the tactics that we see Hamas employing today, their strategy and style of guerrilla warfare, without question, we will see people studying these tactics 100, 200 years from now, without question, because it is hard to show any guerrilla force that has fought, this well, this effectively against an army with nuclear weapons. The Israelis have a navy, they have an air force, they've got all this logistical and military and intelligence support from the West. Biden gave them $14 billion and they already get $3.8 billion a year. They're spoiled, silly. And of course, shamefully, Britain is also providing them support from Cyprus. And so, the point is that the Israelis get all this material support, never mind the political support, for their war effort, and they still fail. What does that say about Hamas, who are not only fighting, we should remember that the Hamas fighters are living in the same conditions that everyone else in Gaza is living in, right? So they're also short on food, they're short on water, they're struggling physically, and yet they persevere nevertheless. They come out on top, and they have proven the Israelis to be a weak, pathetic army. It's been 3 months now that this episode of the occupation of this war has begun, and the Israelis have failed to take a single military objective. They said they want to defeat Hamas. Hamas is still here. The Israelis haven't even been able to take out any Hamas infrastructure, never mind defeat Hamas itself. They managed to kill one leader who wasn't even in Gaza. And that was just to distract from their failures on the battlefield, the very ones you alluded to. And so in addition to failing to defeat Hamas, they said they want to liberate hostages, but all they've done is kill hostages. You've had at least 60 that have been killed by Israel's own bombs. And then another 3 that were killed by ground units when they tried surrendering. It's really an embarrassing, abysmal failure. And the only reason the war is still going is because Netanyahu needs this war for his war cabinet to have a purpose. Otherwise, it would be dissolved. And then he would immediately be thrown into prison or face, more charges. The second that this war finishes, one way or another, he's going to take the fall for everything. And then they won't say, well, it's Israel's fault as a whole, the occupation. They'll try and pin it on him as an individual. And he of course, shares a lot of the blame. But Israel tactically has failed, militarily has failed, and politically its reputation is in tatters.
He's just announced he's going to force his cabinet to take polygraph tests to prove whether they're lying when they say that they're not leaking. It's a very jolly cabinet atmosphere, I must say. Lastly, Richard, the ICC, you have to be black or be a Serbian to get convicted at the ICC. But the ICJ is a slightly different kettle of fish, a less politicized court, one would have hoped, with a better class of judge, more mindful of their legacy. That's why Israel's quite anxious about what's going to happen in the South African case. What's your view on it?
Well, I think, first of all, we should applaud South Africa. We should really thank our brothers and sisters there for taking this to the ICJ, because they have done not just Palestinians, but the whole world a service by reminding everyone of their obligations of international law. And unfortunately, it also has to be said, not to commit genocide. So the ICC is geared towards prosecuting individuals. And as you said, you only qualify for conviction if you're black or a Serbian. When it comes to the ICJ, to the International Court of Justice, this deals with countries, and it also rules on matters of opinion. And so right now, the only reason the Israelis are going to have to defend themselves, usually they wouldn't bother, is because they have signed the Genocide Convention, and they've also, if you've accepted previous rulings, you have to go before the court. It's like the Americans with Nicaragua. They were kind of forced into that situation, even though they didn't want to be in it, although that was a different matter. But the ICJ will convene within a week, and it won't take them long to decide. And then if they rule that Israel is, just if the case has merit, ultimately the Americans at home, they will also be, the Biden administration will be in violation of the Genocide Implementation Act. So this is how treaties are translated into law. It's like the Human Rights Act is the translation of the Human Rights Convention in Britain. So the Biden administration will also be facing cases then because of their complicity, their support, material and political, for Israel. The problem is that even though the ICJ is the highest court in the UN system, Israel has a tradition, has a nasty habit of just giving the finger, pardon my French, to a lot of the UN rulings that come from the Security Council or otherwise. And these are legally binding. The 242 and many others have told Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories, from Syria's Golan Heights, from the West Bank, from Jerusalem. They don't listen. They do not care. And even though the Americans back then let these resolutions pass or voted in favor of them, they've broken with them since. And Biden is more than happy to keep Donald Trump's positions on Israel, which says a lot. I can only hope that something comes of this, because once the ICJ, if they rule in favor of South Africa's case and the Palestinians, all countries in the UN system, all UN member states and those who signed the convention will be obligated to also themselves prevent this genocide from continuing. It will have to cease and desist. Will they actually abide by it? I'm doubtful. I'm very doubtful. I think a lot of countries have shown themselves to be morally lacking. Yeah, and they have failed.
Morally bereft. But look at it this way, Richard. It actually could get some people off the hook. It could actually provide an exit ramp from something that is turning out to be a thoroughgoing disaster for virtually everyone concerned, except the arms manufacturers. It might, in an election year, allow Joe Biden to fight an election without this slaughter continuing on his watch at his expense or at the taxpayers' expense. It might provide an off-ramp for the European governments, who might be then able to say, well, look, obviously we're legally obliged to uphold this decision of the court, and so we can no longer send you weapons, money, and support you diplomatically, and so on. It's just a thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but I think they should still be held accountable nonetheless. And I know you would agree with me, but if it does provide an off-ramp, it should be for to end the conflict, to stop the bombs, but then everyone responsible should still be prosecuted one way or another, because if they are allowed to get away with this, you can say goodbye to humanity itself, because this is a crime on such an unprecedented scale. It's not like Cambodia, it's not like Rwanda, where it wasn't clear what was happening until after the fact. We saw this genocide, you and I and everyone on earth, we saw it from the very moment it began. And there have to be consequences. And I know Biden is fighting an election this year, and that's true. That's also why he doesn't want an escalation in the Red Sea, because Yemen's embargo is also going to affect oil prices, and they've struck Aramco in the past. If they want to, they can do it again. So he also has to take that into consideration. It certainly was during the midterms. And then, the only reason he got elected last time is because, black voters, Latino voters, young voters, voters of color came out and got him elected. And they should remember, everybody involved should remember in November, not to vote for Joe Biden, even if he stops this the next second, because his legacy should forever be that he committed genocide in Gaza.
Brilliant, Richard. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much, Richard Medhurst, the independent journalist and political analyst. Will Israel be convicted of genocide by the International Court of Justice? We've got about 20 minutes to vote. 34,154 of you have voted. Someone will have to do the arithmetic for me. I can't do it whilst broadcasting, but it's a very close run thing. Now, my editor and longest-serving friend, Ron Mackay, points out that it was 14 years ago this day that he and I were kidnapped by Egyptian security officials at the border with Gaza. We were bundled into the back of a van and driven off into the night to where we knew not where. Taken directly to the airport, held and followed even to the toilet by goons of then President Hosni Mubarak, and then marched to the aircraft and given a piece of paper by a little factotum which declared me persona non grata in Egypt. Only a few months later, Hosni Mubarak was behind bars. Let me take a quick break. I'm way past it. There's no Gayatri tonight. She's traveling. So it'll be calls all the way through to 9 o'clock. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
I'm very proud of that film, The Killings of Tony Blair, my first film, made by Gayatri and me, and it's yours for free if you sign up to the Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway, and much more available besides. Now remember, if you want to sign this petition to ban Israel from international sports, here's the link again. It's bit.ly/Israel ban. ISRAELBAN, but be careful typing it because it's case sensitive. So all lower case, bit.ly/Israel ban. It's very important that you do. An email from Bill. As an American Catholic, I'm ashamed at the silence of my church on the slaughter in Palestine. Bill from New York. Well, you and me both, Bill, although it's not quite silence. And at least the Catholic Church has said rather more than other churches, some of which are feverishly supporting the genocide. Some kind of Christianity, that I must say. Laura is in Alaska, on U.S. support for Israel. Always a pleasure, Laura. Welcome back.
Welcome back, and Happy New Year. I'm going to try to do this as succinctly and quickly as possible.
Okay.
Time runs on a continuum. And in the 90s, we were introduced to Epstein through his first conviction, and Alan Dershowitz was his attorney. And at that time, he was given immunity, but not just him. It was also any co-conspirator. And as we all know, from that point, it was also stated that he was part of Intel. Okay, that's in the 90s, right? Early 2000s. Then you get into Benjamin Netanyahu comes and speaks to the Congress against Obama's wishes and gets 2 times a standing ovation after stating that the U.S. will support Israel, okay, in everything it does. But most Americans, and I want my American friends to please hear me clearly, since the 90s, we have now got 37 of our 50 states that have anti-BDS laws on the books. They're unconstitutional, but these anti-BDS laws are for federal workers, federal contractors, and for our politicians that must sign a loyalty pledge to Israel. We are not the United
it's unbelievable.
States of Israel. We are not the United States
No,
of Israel.
Laura,
But
you're
we
right. You're
are.
right. Yeah. Well,
Goodbye.
the situation you describe of loyalty oaths and banning people from boycotting, none of that will work. Abby Martin proved when she was, they tried to force her to sign a loyalty pledge to Israel before she could speak at a university. And the idea of Abby Martin signing any kind of loyalty oath to Israel is, of course, absurd. And she refused and she won. Because, as you say, these things are illegal. They're unconstitutional. And in the end, they will be struck down. But none of that matters if the great American public and the British public, the French public, if the mass of the people say, no more, never again, we will not buy or in any way support the apartheid state of Israel, the genocidal state of Israel, it's done. And the politicians, no matter how much their mouths and pockets are stuffed with APAC gold, will in the end have to follow. Ramplence01 says, has anyone realized that even if Israel builds the Ben Gurion Canal, if Yemen blocks the exit, it will be worthless? How is Israel going to build the Ben Gurion Canal? They can't scratch their arse in Gaza. They've had to hightail it out of there. How are they going to build a canal in Gaza in the current situation? Wise up. Email from Tom says, have I misunderstood this? It is claimed, and I agree, that the American and European political systems are infiltrated and influenced by Israel. Duh. I thought our intelligence agencies were supposed to be there to combat this sort of thing. So either they're all in it together or our intelligence services are just crap. Tom, both of these propositions can, of course, be true and probably are. Brilliant. Let's take some calls about Epstein now. On the line from Seattle is Nathan, who asks, why isn't anyone defending those on Epstein's list? Well, I'm sure you'll have a point of view on that, Nathan. Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing. You don't have anyone that at least play devil's advocate. And, like Bill Clinton, I get emotional when you start talking about him. He's one of the good ones. And he said he was only on the island when they said he likes them young. he's a child philanthropist. Every time he came back from Epstein Island, he was talking about how he was giving it to the kids. And, it's multiple people. Mitch McConnell wanted to debate you on this fact, but he said you've been ducking his debate request. And Joe Biden said the same. He had the same issues with you. So it's just a big part of me thinks that you're only going so hard on Clinton because he's the first black president. And I was told that you're a white supremacist for that. So, and I also wanted to put forward that this whole we had a scandal back in the 90s where Bill Clinton was with one of his secretaries, and part of me thinks that was to cover up maybe early leaking of the Epstein stuff. Like he was getting his genitals handled by someone, and then they just he went out to his secretary and be like, hey, we're going to have an affair, and we're going to make it seem like, we were on an island when it happened. I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm a conspiracy connoisseur.
Obviously, first of all, if you believe that Mitch McConnell has been trying to get on my show and that Mitch McConnell has been refused by us to come on my show, then frankly, you're living not in Seattle, but in cloud cuckoo land. Mitch McConnell would be the most welcome call I could possibly get here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, except for Joe Biden, who you say I'm also avoiding him. You say that Bill Clinton is the first black president, even though he imprisoned the population of a small country of black Americans with his racist, and Joe Biden was a party to that, by the way, his hyping and changing of the laws on 3 strikes and you're out and so on. He contributed to the prison industrial complex. The idea that Bill Clinton is one of the good ones, go tell it to the Marines, Nathan. Email from Enrique. Hi, George. Great show as always. Oh, let me go back. Did you really say I am a white supremacist? Are you insane, Nathan? Me, a white supremacist? Email from Enrique. Hi, George. Great show as always. Israel are in The Hague next Thursday and Friday on genocide charges. I wonder what proportion of the UK population knows that. 1%? The MSM are pathetic and not fit for purpose. Best regards, Enrique. That is brilliant. Encapsulated in 3 sentences. The entire situation. Are 1% of the British and American populations even aware that their best friend is in front of the ICJ on genocide charges next Thursday? Probably not more than 1%, maybe 2%. It's being reported that the Committee to Protect Journalists says that at least 70 Palestinian reporters, as well as 4 Israeli and 3 Lebanese reporters, have been killed in the last 3 months. Paul is in Bournemouth on Epstein and the Mossad. Go ahead, Paul.
George, thanks for having me on the show again. Yes, I think when we hear about Epstein, we should, essentially replace the word Epstein and Maxwell with Mossad and CIA. This was a mechanism put in place essentially to gather intelligence through the compromising of, politicians, financiers, and perhaps even military types. What's interesting is who is not on the list. You don't see rappers, you don't see anybody from the music industry, you don't see actors. So it was, clearly constructed with a particular purpose. It was funded by Mossad, obviously, and the CIA, because both of them get to gain some information. I don't think MI6 was in the middle of it, or MI5, because CIA or the US and Israel want to compromise the UK also, for whichever reason. So That's my view.
Well, I think the only difference I'd have with you is that I very much doubt if it was financed by Mossad. The financing is always done by somebody else on behalf of Israel. Israel doesn't give away money. Israel takes money from the West, from individuals in the West, from the likes of Wexner, who gave that wonderful townhouse to Jeffrey Epstein for a single dollar, in which many of these crimes took place. And we want to see the tapes, or at least we want somebody that can be trusted to view those tapes and tell us what kind of stuff is in them. On everything else you said, I absolutely agree. Paul in Bournemouth, thank you for the call. Corey Renata says the grand old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men times girls. He marched them up to the top of the world and he can't remember them. Brilliant, Corey, brilliant. Terence is in Norwich in England on Epstein. Go ahead, Terence.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway, and happy Hogmanay. I know it's late, but happy Hogmanay anyway. The point I want to make is the big obfuscation at the moment is the sideshow of Epstein, even as scurrilous it is and as filthy as it is. And Alan Dirty Tricks is going to represent Israel, which will be wonderful to see, I guess. But the point is, I've looked at the list on Epstein's flight log and such, and there's somebody called Nadine Dorries is on there. Heaven forfend, a Tory in Britain. I can't believe that. And I want your opinion on why this hasn't been echoed in the Guardian, the bastion of objective news, apparently. And I'd like your opinion on that, please, Mr. Galloway.
Well, I'm not sure if Nadine Dorries is properly on that list. There are a lot of lists bobbing around. One of them turned out to be the first politicians to go down with COVID. And this was posted on social media as a list of people from the files of Epstein. Whitney Webb is the authority on the Epstein story from A to Z. We're trying to get her as a guest on Wednesday to dive more deeply into this. But if Nadine Dorries was there, I doubt if she was there for the sex, knowing Nadine Dorries, any more than Peter Mandelson would be there for the sex, not his kind of thing. They were there for the power. They were there for the power broking, which was going on. And by the way, power broking by a convicted sex offender who thought he had immunity from further prosecution and might well have won the case if he had not committed suicide in the worst case of suicide ever seen since that black man fished out of the Mississippi with 10 machine gun bullets in his back. Terence, thank you for that. Email from Stephen. George, 2 lovely Palestinian ladies have set up a camp outside Sheffield Town Hall. One of them has started a hunger strike. I will try to get them to call you tonight or on Wednesday if you would like to hear from them. That's from Stephen Roy. Well, of course, we'd love to hear from them, but I'll have to advise them, as I did on Wednesday, to another hunger striker to call off the hunger strike. Palestine doesn't need people in England starving themselves to death, making themselves ill. It needs people who are on the tip of their toes and full of vibrancy and life, fighting their cause. Mohammed is in Florida on Palestine. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Hey there, I'm just tuning in after being a long-time listener and wanted to personally thank you for making me laugh with your funny stories about getting kidnapped at the Egyptian border, because I can believe it.
Yeah, that happened. 14 years ago this day, this night, I was in the back of Hosni Mubarak's van.
Sounds like a great night, huh? Well, there's not much that I wanted to say about the Jeffrey Epstein list, since that was the last topic being discussed, I think. But without going into too much detail, being from the West Bank and also having a U.S. citizenship puts me in a peculiar spot where I am apparently going against Congress if I voice my opinions on the current conflict. So, for my own safety and to avoid your 14-year kidnapping story, I just wanted to say thank you for representing Palestine and giving Gazans, fellow family members, fellow neighbors, and friends a voice that should be heard more. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you, Mohammed. We know that's not your real name and that you're not really in Florida, so they're not going to catch up with you. I'm sure of that, or hopeful of that. Very, very kind, what you said. Here I stand. I can do no other. I have stood here since 1975. That's a long time ago in anybody's language. And I'm not going to give up now, as long as God gives me breath. And the last words on my lips, if I can in any way decide it, will be Palestine. Long live Palestine. Free, Arab, dignified. That's where I stand. Michael, in Dublin, on the murder of yet another journalist in Palestine today. Go ahead, Mike.
Happy Hogmanay to you, George. Yeah, I'm really upset about the way the journalists on the mainstream media are just ignoring their colleagues being murdered in vast numbers in Gaza. It's absolutely, this young man, his father was injured, his brother was killed, his grandchildren were killed.
His mother was killed, his grandchildren were killed.
Yeah, no, not the young man's grandchildren, the father's grandchildren. His father was a journalist there as well. Yeah, but the thing about it is, what shocks me is journalists all over. I'm here in Dublin, and every time we get a mention of Gaza, which is not that often on our main news channel here, RTE, the first thing they do is they regurgitate everything that happened on October 7th. That's the emphasis. That's the way they lead into the show. They lead into any reports about what's happening in Gaza. And it's skimpy information we're getting here at all about the death rates and the children being killed in Gaza. And then the journalists...
no, they're not. They don't care. They don't care about that, Michael. They don't care about Palestinian children. They are stuck where they want to be stuck on what happened on October 7th, except they're not even bringing you the truth about what happened on October 7th. Where have you seen on the mainstream media that Israel possibly killed hundreds of their own citizens as a matter of deliberate policy, a policy drawn up by Netanyahu? But they're not talking about the tens of thousands of women and children that have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, or in the West Bank where there's no Hamas and no uprising. Hundreds have been killed. I want to ask you a question, Mike. It might be tricky for you to answer. Some of my friends will find it a tricky question too. On St. Patrick's Day, should Irish politicians be in the White House posing for grinning selfies with the right-hand man of genocide, Joe Biden?
Absolutely not. And what I am required, when I'm on this show with you, George, I want to call on the Irish government and all our politicians of all classes and creeds, Sinn Féin, wherever, the whole lot of them, to support South Africa in their campaign, in their thing about genocide in Gaza. I want the Irish politicians to come out and do that.
Yeah, well, to be fair, Sinn Féin have called for that, but the others resolutely oppose it. But I'm just wondering if Sinn Féin will be in the Oval Office on St. Patrick's Day? I hope not. Fiaz is in London on a now infamous interview with our friend Dr. Mustafa Barghouti and a certain Julia Heartless Brute. Go ahead, Fiaz.
Hi there, George. Can you hear me well in the studio?
Thank you. Go ahead. We're all ears. Go ahead, Fiaz.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that despicable. You can't even call it a journalism from Gutless Brewer. I mean, then again, considering she's on Talk TV, which is a Murdoch-owned show, I wasn't really. I can't say I'm really surprised to see her act in that way. But if that's the level of journalism, if you could even call it that, then I guess anyone can become a journalist just by going on any online network and ranting about whatever fits your narrative.
Yeah, she is, Fiaz, Heartless Brute is PiersMorgan with balls. She's what PiersMorgan would be if he had balls. And that's all she's got. She has what in Yiddish we say, she has chutzpah, she has a brass neck. She knows nothing. She thinks Sinai is the plural of sinus. She wouldn't know a camel toe from the port of Eilat. She doesn't know anything. She's pig thick. Ignorant, pig thick. And the problem with wrestling with a pig is that you get covered in you know what. And the pig likes that. That's what pigs do. That's why I say don't go on her show. Don't go on the emasculated, heartless brute PiersMorgan's show. Don't go on Talk TV. They're just using these things for clicks. Nobody was watching that channel. Nobody. 93 days ago. Now people are watching it because things like what happened to the gracious, distinguished and gentle Dr. Mustafa Barghouti at the hands of this ignorant brute who knows nothing. I can tell you, I've known her for 25 years. She knows nothing about anything in the Middle East. Suddenly they're spewing vile, bigoted hate at a man like Barghouti. She did it for clicks. And we are giving them clicks by appearing on their show. PiersMorgan asked me 12 times in the last 93 days to go on his show. I told him, no, you come on my show. Apart from anything else, a lot more people will see it. Poll results are as follows. 35,676 people voted. I hope someone has done the arithmetic because I cannot do so whilst speaking and broadcasting at the same time. I do know, just from looking at it, that it is actually a close run thing. When I get that number, I'll bring it to you. YouTube comments. History Discover says, if Americans demand my family accept our home split in half so immigrants can take it, then they must accept giving half of the USA to Mexican immigrants so they can come for a new homeland. And Melissa Dirlish says, George, we watched your Iraq war debate with Christopher Hitchens, thanks to Mohammed Hijab, who described it as an absolute classic and the only debate Christopher ever lost. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to my friend Mohammed hijab for circulating it. Paul in Kent has a message for the legend Erebus in New York. We better hear what it is. Paul, what would you like to say?
Can you lend me some money, please? I'm joking.
No, I can't. As a matter of fact, I can't. Go ahead.
I just want to pay for his year's subscription to the MOATS. That's all.
Okay, good man.
And
what's your message for Erebus?
Good man, like you, good man. And I love hearing it. I know he's a little bit tight to the wind for cash. But if your guys phone me, I'll give details and pay for his year's subscription. If that's all right for you, of course.
It's not only is it all right, it is a gracious and noble offer that someone should take up so that Erebus doesn't feel bad, because we love him. As I say, he's the Barry White of the mother of all talk shows, with the most beautiful basso profundo voice. And we miss him tonight, because the last call is from the legend that is Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. It's regarding Israel in sport. And I was thinking that at least Israel, they must participate at least under a neutral flag, like the Russians, but like the apartheid of South Africa, they were banned from all the sports, especially rugby, weren't they, till they changed? But, I mean, it's much worse.
Rugby and cricket, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, apart from Israel being an apartheid state like that, they're much worse because of their genocide in Gaza. And, I mean, I thought that Nima spoke very powerfully, really. I don't like it, and I just hope to goodness, until there's a ceasefire and justice, that they can't be allowed to compete under their Israel. They mustn't, must they?
No, I agree with you. I mean, I don't know if it's widely known, but they've actually turned a football stadium in Gaza into a concentration camp within the concentration camp. They've got people parading around in their underwear. Old men, young boys, children in their underwear in the January cold of Gaza. They are disappearing people, they are murdering people, they are torturing people in a football stadium in Gaza. Now, the last time there was blood on the grass, there it is. The last time there was blood on the grass was when Scotland played in the stadium in Santiago in Chile, in which thousands of people had been tortured and murdered after the US organized overthrow of the socialist president Salvador Allende, the rounding up of key supporters, including cultural icons of global significance, like Victor Jara, who were then tortured and murdered there. And then Scotland went to play a football match in that stadium. And that was our slogan, blood on the grass. You know, it's all very well, Norma, and I know because you're a fair-minded person and you love your sport, it's all very well saying keep politics out of sport.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say
that. No, I know. I'm saying it. If you keep politics out of sport, that means you've got to play, you've got to go to the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936 and say Heil Hitler. We can't keep politics out of sport because politics is everywhere in our lives. Norma, last word to you.
Well, it's just, I mean, even when they had the tennis, they were under a neutral flag. They didn't show the names of the countries they came from. And one of the tennis players, who was from Ukraine, who was a good tennis player, she wouldn't even shake hands if she lost or won against a Russian or a Belarusian player. Now that was, I thought, stupid. But I'm talking about big teams. and big participation under the name of Israel. And it can't happen. It can't.
Well, beautifully expressed. I don't see why the Olympic Games is broken into countries in the first place. Why don't we just put all the best Olympians with the best records, with the best times, into the Olympic Games? Why do they have to carry a flag? Once they carry a flag, you're bringing politics into sport. And events will happen where that flag is no longer acceptable in polite international company. But what we certainly cannot have is some countries being banned and other countries being welcomed, when actually the country that's being welcomed is guilty of exponentially larger crimes than the country, in this case Russia, even more Belarus, have committed. So we can't have this sick hypocrisy. We have to do something about it. And what we should do is what Nima called on us to do, to sign that petition that we pointed out to you earlier today. I want to close the show on a note of optimism. I believe that the ICJ will find it very difficult not to convict Israel of genocide without discrediting their entire court, the whole of the United Nations still further, the idea of law and justice. If they're ready to murder those ideas, fine, go ahead. Fly in the face of all the evidence. Pretend you didn't hear the Israeli leaders saying what they said, what we've all seen them saying. Pretend you didn't see the genocidal crimes being promised and then being committed. Pretend. But then don't expect anyone to believe a single word of your sick, sordid hypocrisy about international law, about human rights, about the United Nations. Tell that to the Marines. It's been marvelous, I think, the show tonight. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK time, where we'll hope to dive further into the Epstein swamp. I think it may be time to do that. It's been marvelous. Thanks very much for joining me on the Mother of All Talk Shows.